On the 8th of July 2025, FIFA announced to the world that they were delighted to open up their second official office in the United States of America in only 11 months. The first came in Miami in August of 2024. The second is a bit more interesting. The city, New York. The location, Trump Tower. Coincidentally, the same building where notorious former FIFA executive Chuck Blazer was residing before the boys in blue reprimanded him and converted him into a whistleblower. It was his testimony that largely contributed towards the demise of the quote-unquote old FIFA. At the time of this conversion, the man was reportedly living in an $18,000 a month penthouse with a $6,000 a month adjoining apartment for his cats. But that's a whole other story. FIFA and US officials have been getting awfully cozy lately, which is a crazy development when you consider the fact that only a decade ago, the country set out to destroy FIFA. But more specifically, Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA, and Donald Trump, the president of the United States, have been getting quite cozy, which is not often the stereotypical relationship one has with their landlord. So close are they, in fact, that in May of 2025, Infantino opted to prioritize networking alongside Trump in the Middle East over the most important governance event on FIFA's annual calendar. He arrived over 3 hours late. And then on the flip side of things, it is common knowledge that sports is a great conduit for galvanizing the masses and, directing people's attention from other, things. Now let's look at this a little differently, maybe be a little bit more pragmatic. Is all of this being blown out of proportion?
What did you do?
Everybody's always blaming me for everything.
We're about to have what will likely end up being the biggest World Cup to date in the world's global superpower. You'd expect the two heads of the most important entities involved to work closely with one another. Plus, Trump has historically registered interest in sports. You can't really deny that. Amongst those, he's been a long and vocal UFC backer. Here he is doing the English League Cup draw back in 1991.
Number 6.
Will play Manchester United.
Oh, Donald, you don't realise what you've done there.
Early in 2025, he became the first sitting president to attend a Super Bowl. He did the same for the Club World Cup final. In fact, here he is on stage celebrating, winning the tournament. For anyone that says politics has nothing to do with football, I present to you this picture right here. Is there more to this? Let's investigate. Hello, hope you're doing well. Welcome back. I'm Tinashe. This video is satire. Also subscribe and also follow the podcast on Spotify and Apple Music. The relationship between FIFA and the United States is one that stretches back for a very, very long time, and one that is more confusing than you might think. The US Soccer Federation was formed in 1913 and affiliated with FIFA by 1914. In fact, in the inaugural 1930 World Cup, the US team finished third place. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the history of football in the United States, as I've already done so in these two videos over here, which you can check out if you want. But what I do think is worth doing is doing a quick catch-up up to the 21st century so we can build a bit of context. Despite the promising start throughout the 20th century, football saw only brief periods of growth in the country. Nothing sustainable. The rest of the world, South America and Europe in particular, did nothing but grow football to the point where it is the premier sport across the board and undoubtedly the most popular sport in the world. For the US, it seemed like things were about to change when FIFA awarded the 1994 World Cup to them. And things did change. The tournament was a massive success. World Cup 1994 shattered attendance records. Nearly 3.6 million in-stadium spectators in total, averaging about 69,000 people per match. People were skeptical that soccer would be able to fill stadiums, but the tournament ended up breaking records and achieving numbers that would be extremely difficult to achieve over 30 years later. The MLS was formed a year later, and the sport grew. But if we're all being real, it was never going to reach the heights of the NBA, the NFL, and the MLB, and more. The US produces some of the greatest athletes to ever exist, but they would all rather play the legacy sports that they grew up watching, have more grassroots support, and are quite frankly exceedingly more lucrative. FIFA have always wanted to change this, but likely recognize they can't win this war anytime soon. But what they can do is get people to tune into the already high-level football going on abroad, and in an attention economy, that's more than good enough. Plus, it could also very well lead to increased adoption. At the end of the day, the enormous commercial market the US represents is far too enticing to snub. So, we come full circle. The US had already demonstrated its value to FIFA as a host, a source of sponsors and revenue. Another World Cup on American soil was an inevitability, but making one happen has proven to be a bit of a point of contention, ironically, for the very same reasons that many believe FIFA so desperately want to grow their US footprint. The United States planned to bid for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups, but in a controversial 2010 vote, FIFA awarded the 2018 tournament to Russia. Now, the US actually knew that the 2018 World Cup would be quite a long shot, as it was quite well known that the next World Cup would likely be going to somewhere in Europe, so they pooled their resources and focused on a 2022 bid, which they lost.
The winner to organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
Even worse, it seems by most accounts it's well documented that the US bid for the 2022 World Cup was far superior than every other bid involved. These results, they shocked many, but apparently not all. The loss of the 2022 bid particularly stung US soccer as well as the rest of the world. At this point, widespread speculation of something nefarious taking place became rampant. It turns out, something was indeed going on, and by 2015, doors were hitting the floors through blunt force and handcuffs were being prepared. In the biggest scandal that the sport has ever seen, numerous FIFA executives were arrested on charges of bribery and corruption spanning over several decades. This is Bonita Merciades. In 2010, she was a senior executive for the Football Federation of Australia and was a prominent member of the Australian bidding team for the 2022 World Cup. However, after witnessing the atrocities and underhanded behavior of those within her own committee and FIFA, she decided to turn whistleblower. I'm going to play you an extract from an interview she did with Democracy Now! In 2015, pretty much days within all the arrests happening.
That's just so typical of Sepp Blatter, because he doesn't necessarily have a good understanding or a good sense of what governance is.
She then goes on to speak about how favors would be used to influence decision-making.
And what were those favors?
One good example is Australia decided to fund the upgrade of a stadium in Trinidad and Tobago. But, the question has to be raised, did we think there was a vote attached to it? The $500,000 that was given to upgrade that stadium ended up in the personal bank account of Mr. Warner.
Jack Warner was the former FIFA vice president, the president of CONCACAF, and the former Minister of National Security of Trinidad and Tobago. At the beginning of this interview, she was, of course, referring to former FIFA president Sepp Blatter, who was subsequently banned from all FIFA-related activities and faced several charges. However, it is worth saying that at the time of this recording, he has never been successfully prosecuted under criminal charges. Merciades eventually came around to writing a very interesting book in 2018, titled Whatever It Takes, The Inside Story of the FIFA Way. In this book, she details how gifts, cash, and favors are often used to sway member nations and get their votes. She talks about how she witnessed her own native Australia taking part in this, her interactions with the biggest players and offenders, how Qatar won, her own role, and much more. In one extract, she details a conversation she had with Sepp Blatter himself, where the man spoke freely about a call he made alongside US Soccer Federation president at the time, Sunil Gulati. The call was directed towards President Barack Obama, and the subject was the 2022 World Cup. It was a courtesy call the night before the votes had even happened. Quote, "We phoned President Obama together the night or two before, and I told him it's going to be very difficult for you to win. He understood what had gone on. He thanked me for telling him." Strange thing to say before a vote had even happened. But Blatter has consistently maintained that he was a vehement proponent for the US bid in 2022. It seems that he was pretty displeased himself that they lost. And according to the former FIFA president, he was only aware of the US's soon-to-be failed bid after president of UEFA and Frenchman Michel Platini met with French President Nicolas Sarkozy and Qatari royalty at the Palais d'Elysée in late 2010. Platini is on record saying Sarkozy openly wanted him to vote for Qatar, but never asked him directly. 9 days after this meeting, Platini voted for Qatar to host and apparently convinced a lot of others to do the same. Not a particularly difficult ask when one indictment claimed that these requests were being sweetened with up to $5 million in kickbacks per vote. 7 months later, Qatari Sports Investments, or QSI, a Qatari-backed organization, bought PSG, which so happens to be President Sarkozy's favorite team. The Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund began pumping ungodly amounts of money into the French economy and purchasing prime real estate. Platini's son, Laurent, was then recruited as the CEO of Burda, a QSI-owned sports apparel company. As a funny side note, well, I found it funny, at the very least. Blatter once recalled how Michel Platini justified this switch to Qatar. Quote, "Sepp, what would you do if your president asked you for something? I then told him that the question didn't arise for me because we don't have a president in Switzerland." Honestly, fair enough. American authorities saw all this going down and couldn't believe that FIFA had the audacity to pull this stunt. At their expense too, the gloves came off, and the US got to work and led the arrests and indictments of key FIFA officials. The Department of Justice claimed that over $200 million in bribes, kickbacks, and favors was dished out over 2 decades of activity to corrupt FIFA officials. Now, there were actually a few reasons that the US took the lead in this case. Much of the money involved was wired and carried through US-based banks, often in New York. Many of the meetings of FIFA officials took place in the country. Truth be told, the US is within a very, very small group of countries with the resources, legal tools, and political will to go after an organization the size of FIFA successfully. And finally, the US had a wealth of FIFA-affiliated American-based whistleblowers themselves, such as Chuck Blazer, whom I mentioned at the start. He was the US Soccer Federation Vice President, a FIFA Executive Committee member, the CONCACAF General Secretary, and a lead informant. Quote, "They were expected to uphold the rules that keep soccer honest. Instead, they corrupted the business of worldwide soccer to serve their interests and enrich themselves," said US Attorney General Loretta Lynch. Something to keep in mind is that before 2018, the voting process for the World Cup incorporated only about 24 people: the president, all heads of the continental federations, and a few additional appointed representatives from the regions across the board. 24 is not a lot, and when all you need is a majority, the amount of people that you need to compromise to win a vote really isn't all that much. Since 2018, the voting process now includes all 200 plus member associations, with all votes now being public and all details of each bidding host's respective bid being publicly available. This was never done in such detail and transparency before, for obvious reasons. Changes were necessary. Moving along, trust in FIFA on a global level was at an all-time low following all of this. It was clear that the United States were not afraid to blow the lid wide open on all of this, and some believe that they were just doing the right thing, while others believe that they were fueled by vengeance and wanted to target FIFA for denying them a World Cup. Wherever the truth lies, FIFA had a lot of work to do in regaining trust. And so, football's global governing body got to work. New compliance and ethics structures were formed. FIFA has also heavily increased its presence within the US to support youth development, outreach strategies to make the game more accessible and popular to American audiences, has been already discussed at length on all platforms you can think of. Term limits were given to officials, which is just a crazy thing to read out loud as a novel concept. Blatter was president for 17 years, and his predecessor, João Havelange, was president for 24 years. Under current regulations, the term limit is now a maximum of 12 years. In the wake of Sepp Blatter and his colleagues being ejected, new president, Italian-Swiss lawyer Gianni Infantino, was elected to the hot seat in 2016. The man who would bring integrity to the game amongst all the chaos. He was named in the Panama Papers for having co-signed documents that are suspected of being linked to bribes while he was a UEFA employee in 2006. He denied all wrongdoing. Benefit of the doubt? Anyway, with the world watching closely, on the 13th of June 2018, the winner of the 2026 World Cup was announced. The United States, in a joint bid with Canada and Mexico, won by a landslide. To this date, nothing credible and concrete has come out to prove that this was doctored. The first step in mending trust was complete. The bare minimum, it's all you can ask for sometimes. The joint North American bid won by 134 to 65 against Morocco. Enter the 45th president. Donald Trump is elected to the US presidency in 2016. A controversial decision to some. So it happened again. And I feel like at this point I need to re-emphasize that this episode is not about Donald Trump's US policies, his governance, or anything as such. I said it at the beginning, and I feel like I really just need to say it again. But this channel, it's satire. In fact, I'm not even a real person. In Donald Trump's first term as US president, he played an unusual role in the 2026 bidding process. Breaking with the encouraged approach to not interfere with the bidding process, Trump openly lobbied on behalf of the US, Canada, Mexico bid. In 2018, he tweeted out, a warning shot to any nations that didn't support the US World Cup bid. The US has put together a strong bid with Canada and Mexico for the World Cup. It would be a shame if countries that we always support were to lobby against the US bid. Why should we be supporting these countries when they don't support us, including at the United Nations? Regardless, this was clearly deemed to not be a breach of any rules. The bid was won. And rightly so, by the way. I don't want there to be any confusion with what I'm saying about this. The US bid was far more superior than every other one. But this tweet was quite significant to a lot of people. Perhaps conversations had been had before and direct interactions prior to this can be sourced, but this tweet was a very public declaration of incorporation. FIFA now had the American president's personal imprint. By all accounts, it seemed that with the award of the tournament going to North America, FIFA and the US signaled that whatever tensions existed in 2015 had been set aside, i.e., we're open for business. And so the controversy floods in. A major development in the FIFA-USA relationship has been the frequency of interactions between FIFA President Gianni Infantino and US President Donald Trump. Both were elected to their positions for the first time in 2016, and since then, Infantino has made regular public appearances in the White House. Here he is at Trump's inauguration. The FIFA president has also registered multiple visits to Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. At a dinner during the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2020, Infantino introduced Trump by calling him definitely a sportsman, likening Trump's competitive drive and winning mindset to that of an elite athlete. Trump replies,
I want to thank you very much. You've been my great friend, and it's an honor.
Thank you.
But I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your steadfast movement. You just didn't stop. You wanted to have it there, and I wanted to have it there, and we really did it before we came to office. Before I got into office, we did that one.
The priorities of Infantino were made crystal clear in May of 2025, as concerns over this budding relationship soared even higher. The FIFA president rescheduled several events and arrived over 3 hours late to FIFA's annual Congress in Paraguay. He was spending time in the Middle East with Donald Trump, as well as Saudi and Qatari royalty. The annual Congress is the most important event in football governance. It's where all the most consequential decisions are made in terms of the future of football. We're talking rule changes, leadership changes, and all the details of major tournaments. Upon his late arrival, Infantino defended his actions. "I felt like I had to be there to represent all of you, to represent football. As president of FIFA, my responsibility is to make decisions in the interests of the organization." This was not received well by high-ranking FIFA members, with many of them walking out in protest. This included UEFA President Alexander Ceferin. To have the timetable changed at the last minute for what appears to be simply to accommodate private political interests does the game no service and appears to put its interests second. That was a direct extract from a statement from UEFA following this debacle. Earlier in the same week, Infantino rescheduled a FIFA Council meeting for the same reason. Many believe that this entire event highlighted a perception that had been bubbling for quite some time. Infantino was putting politics and Trump above football. The two are both highly controversial figures, and both of them, if we're being completely real, are politicians. But the questions that many have had regarding this relationship more or less boil down to one. What does this mean for the fans? And nowhere is this question more prevalent than in Trump's anti-immigration sentiment. FIFA has always prided themselves on a global inclusive mission. However, even those on local grounds are now nervous about whether tomorrow might be the day that someone they know is grabbed by masked government officials. Now imagine the sentiment felt by foreigners, myself included, who are preparing to make the trek to enjoy a festival of football or support their countries. Infantino, however, has downplayed these concerns.
Do you have any concerns about immigration and customs enforcement agents being at the games?
No, I don't have any concerns about anything. The most important for us is to guarantee security for all fans who come.
And assurances appear to have been given to athletes and team staff. But many have pointed out that no such concrete assurances are in place for fans. And faced with an ever-expanding list of travel-banned countries, this is not a good sign. Quote, "We want them to come, we want them to celebrate, we want them to watch the game, but when the time is up, they'll have to go home." That's J.D. Vance, Trump's vice president. All of those at the top seem to be providing assurances that things will go smoothly, but what's quite telling is the fact that these assurances are required. And they require to be vocal from all these different angles. This is not the first World Cup that's ever happened. It's not a novel concept for people to go to a country, support their team, and then go home afterwards. Why does the vice president need to tell us that? But moving along, a common observation by critics is that Trump's foreign policy style, prioritizing big deals, glamour, and alliances with wealthy autocrats, closely mirrors FIFA's own habits and track record of priorities. Saudi Arabia have been chosen to host the 2034 World Cup and, strangely enough, won that race unopposed. Previous World Cups have gone to Qatar and Russia, famously countries that Trump has been accused of getting far too close to in terms of whatever negotiations go on behind closed doors. A very recent example, fresh in the minds of many, is the fact that the Qatari royal family offered the Trump administration the use of a $400 million custom Boeing 747, intended to replace Air Force One during Trump's presidency, the aircraft's being labeled as a flying palace. He accepted.
And by the way, got a beautiful, big, magnificent, free airplane for the United States Air Force, okay? Very proud of that too. They tried to say, oh, it's Trump's airplane. Oh yeah, sure. It's too big.
Football officials across the board have been very vocal about this new direction for Trump and Infantino. Looking ahead to the 2026 FIFA World Cup, all eyes are on how this relationship will deliver results. Now, the relationship between FIFA and the US has changed significantly over the last decade. Now, the US, along with Canada and Mexico, are set to host a World Cup that consists of 48 teams for the first time ever, the biggest tournament to date. They will pay host to millions of visitors across 16 different cities. There is a lot of pressure for this to go well, and the Trump administration, to their credit, is going to be under a lot of scrutiny to get everything right. Infantino, meanwhile, has staked a lot on the US market. He's shown he'll fly anywhere, anytime to meet Trump, so we can expect continued high-level meetings. But having said all of that, it's very difficult to escape the perception that this World Cup is being prepped to be remembered as the Trump and Infantino World Cup. Both of them are very larger-than-life personalities and have displayed propensity to prioritize deal-making to promote growth and leaving some sort of legacy behind. And going back to the common fan, where does this growth leave them? Not anywhere good, according to the loudest critics. Legacy viewers feel like they're about to be discriminated or priced out due to certain policies. There's a lot of discussion about how more games for the players lead to more downstream side effects, such as injuries, fatigue, and more, and more. All while the powers that be conduct everything from a flying palace. But here's a flip side, because you guys know that I like to try and provide that on this channel. A bigger game is good, in theory. You know, a bigger game means more resources that can be used to increase production quality and distribution, something that would be very much welcomed by a lot of people. You know, let's take the Club World Cup, for example. A lot of people were opposed to that, but the fact that they played every single game for free, everyone was able to keep in the loop and keep updated with what was going on. A lot of people really enjoyed that, myself included. Also, a growing US base would be a great addition and only aid the game progress, I'd think. Now, I really do hope you've seen I've tried to remain factual in this video and only talk about things that have happened and not really bring in that much opinion unless it's for a joke or for, you know, something particularly poignant like immigration. But it should be clear to everyone that we're about to see a monumental shift in football over the next few years. Who knows what the lasting legacy and impact of the World Cup 2026 is going to be, good or bad. What I do know is that things are about to get very interesting. And there we have it. Obviously, this video was a little bit more on the politics side than I'm used to and you guys are used to. Very rarely do these kinds of ones, but it seems like a particularly pertinent topic at this current point in time. What do you guys think about all of this political meddling and agendas and all that sort of stuff? Leave it all in the comments below. Also, feel free to check out the podcast. It is on Spotify and Apple Music, releasing weekly episodes there, and it's a good time. That's all for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I'll catch you in the next one.